Once a familiar sight across the entire UK network, the Class 56 was a versatile heavy freight locomotive that powered all manner of trains for over 30 years, though their journey hasn't been a smooth one, as while they could deliver the power where necessary, early faults in their aging design meant they were quickly shortlisted for replacement once more efficient and younger classes became available. The concept of the Class 56 essentially came about in order to fill a hole left during the 1955 modernisation plan, as while British Railways had planned to see the replacement of steam on a like-for-like basis by diesel and electric equivalents, the standards proposed did not contain specifications for fast locomotives intended for express work and engines intended purely for heavy freight use. The BR management would justify this failure to immediately address these two major categories through the provision of the Brush Type 4, later Class 47, a highly versatile mixed-traffic locomotive, of which 512 examples would eventually be delivered for both freight and passenger workings. While the Brush Type 4s were capable of handling the types of train common in the steam era, they proved to be somewhat wanting when deployed on the demanding and heavy merry-go-round coal, as well as the increasing number of block trains, both types that did not exist when the modernisation plan was drawn up. By the 1970s, this issue was thrown into sharp focus when there was a requirement for an increased number of coal trains as a result of the 1973 oil crisis, while at the same time, some of the earlier diesels of the modernisation era were reaching the end of their useful lives, thereby leading to the decision being made to explore the construction of a new design specifically for use on heavy freight trains. At the time, British Rail lacked the capacity to design and deliver such a locomotive, and thus instead drew up a detailed specification which was distributed around suitable external manufacturers, this including a requirement for the new locomotive to be of around 3,000 horsepower, have an advanced method of control, and to be equipped with a single power unit. Interest in the proposal was shown from a number of companies both domestically and internationally, but in the end, Brush Traction of Loughborough submitted the successful proposal, which was to feature a body based on the Class 47, but with a more powerful engine, an alternator rather than a generator, and the use of electronic control. Due to capacity issues at the Brush plant in Loughborough, and BR's insistence that the 60-strong order needed to be delivered as quickly as possible, assembly of the first batch of engines was subcontracted to the electro-putery plant of Craiova in Romania. Bogies for these locomotives, meanwhile, were of a Swiss design, and were to be produced by another Romanian plant at Reseda, while the electrical components and power units were built in Britain and shipped out for final assembly. The first unit of what was dubbed the Class 56, 56001, was completed in April 1976, and tested on Romanian railways before being taken, with 56002, by ferry to the UK, and then onwards to Tinsley Depot in Sheffield during August of the same year. Unfortunately, on inspection, the locomotives were found to have been built to a very poor standard, with substandard welding, electrical issues, and an inadequate bogie design being among the many faults highlighted, these issues requiring each locomotive to have a large amount of remedial work carried out, which delayed introduction into service. In fact, it wouldn't be until November 1978, over 2 years later, before 56001 would finally begin work for BR, though 56006 would predate its entry into service, becoming the first Class 56 to haul a revenue-earning train in February 1977, but it wasn't until the end of that year that the final Romanian-built locomotive arrived in Britain. Meanwhile, it had been arranged for further class members to be assembled by British Rail Engineering, with locomotives from 56031 onwards being built at Doncaster Works, with detailed differences between the Romanian and British batches, including a new pattern of side grille being introduced, while a further external change from 56056 onwards was the introduction of a large square horn cover and a slightly different cab design. The first Doncaster locomotive, 56031, was completed in May 1977, and went almost immediately into service, becoming part of the operational fleet before 13 of the Romanian examples that were still undergoing modifications. BR then placed a further order for another 30 locomotives, and this was extended to 75, completing the class of 135 machines, these being once again assembled at Doncaster, although production was moved to crew from 56116 onwards due to a requirement to make space for Class 58 production in South Yorkshire, the crew-built locomotives taking until the end of 1984 to be completed. Initially, and once accepted into traffic, the Class 56s were mainly deployed on coal trains and were allocated to depots in Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire, with their sphere of operation later extending to power stations in the west of England and the north-east. Once more locomotives became available, 10 were sent to South Wales, where they were used on Port Talbot to Llanwern iron ore trains, while some went to Cricklewood for use on cement trains, though most would be employed on their intended coal trains, with examples now working on all regions where this type of traffic was operated. In 1982, the type began working on aggregate trains from Westbury, although their time in this work was marked by periods of unreliability, the frustration of which caused the private aggregate firms, including Foster Yeoman, to purchase their own diesel locomotives from American manufacturers, leading eventually to the arrival of the Class 59 as built by General Motors, which provided a 95% availability. In 1987, British Rail's rail freight sector, as formed in 1982, was divided further into the individual types of traffic handled by the wider rail freight industry, with Class 56s being allocated to either the coal or construction divisions, although a small number did eventually find themselves allocated to ballast traffic, being then allocated to Stewart's Lane Depot in London. Further reorganisation saw the fleet distributed to the new load haul, Transrail and mainline freight shadow companies during the early 1990s, bringing with them further livery changes, with load haul and Transrail receiving Class 56s, 57 units to the former and 78 units to the latter, load haul engines being mostly painted in the company's stylish black and orange livery, while the Transrail examples wore the rail freight two-tone grey livery with the Transrail corporate logo. In 1996, the American-owned English, Welsh and Scottish Railways, or EWS, procured and amalgamated the previous shadow franchises back into a single operation, bringing most of the engines under common ownership once again, though as the Class 56s aged, reliability problems continued to plague their operations with increasing frequency, while EWS was determined to see a standardized heavy freight locomotive replace the older BR classes. In 1998, the first of the Class 66s, as based on the earlier Class 59s, arrived from North America to replace the older Class 31s, Class 37s, Class 47s, Class 56s and Class 60s, with most of the 56s, by this point, being concentrated mainly in the northeast and Humberside, but with their duties widened to include steel, chemicals, bitumen and tank trains. However, by this point, one unit had been withdrawn due to accident damage, that being 56002 back in 1994, while 56042, which had a unique set of bogies, was also taken out of traffic. But following the introduction of the Class 66s, withdrawals truly began in earnest, and by the turn of the century more than half of the fleet had been retired, with a total of only 25 units left by the end of 2003. Nevertheless, while Class 56s were being withdrawn en masse, this didn't spell the end for their operational service, with 30 examples being hired out for the construction of high-speed lines in France, being procured by Virtus, a shadow brand of the French rail freight company VFLI, which was contracted to deliver the LGV Est high-speed route from Paris to Strasbourg, which opened in phases between 2007 and 2016. For EWS, the final turns of duty for Class 56s within this company came on March 31, 2004, when the last units, 56115 and 56078, worked the Twilight Grid's Farewell Rail Tour from Bristol to York and return, though this again wasn't the end of these powerful diesels, as while a handful went into preservation, 2 of them returned to the main line shortly afterwards, when they were bought by Fastline Freight in 2006. Fastline would mechanically upgrade their Class 56s, numbers 56045 and 56124, with the modified units being renumbered to 56301 and 302, later joined by 56125, which became 56303 after being sold to Revel, while DC Rail, a small spot hire company, bought another 2 units, and Europhoenix would obtain 2 additional locomotives. 4 more examples were later bought from the scrapman by Collis Rail, which put them to work on various ad hoc and long-term contract freight services, including oil tankers, log trains and engineers' workings for Network Rail, while Europhoenix eventually exported its 2 locomotives to Hungary, along with formerly preserved 56101. Another batch of 16 engines also escaped the scrapyard and were obtained by UK rail leasing, with some of these being made available for spot hire, though they were later sold off to GB Rail Freight, who are now in the process of converting these engines to run on EMD 12710 series power units as per the Class 66, creating a new class of locomotive dubbed the Class 69. Under this program, all 16 of GBRF's Class 56s are to be converted, with the first unit, 69001, undergoing initial trials on the Severn Valley Railway in February 2021, while by January 2023, 7 examples of the class had been converted, with the last of the company's Class 56s, as built, undertaking a farewell rail tour on January 14, 2023, with 56081 and 56098 running from Wembley Central to Barrow Hill and return. In the end, the Class 56s proved that, when operational, they could conduct themselves in the manner promised when originally designed, hauling the heaviest freight trains on the UK network and proving to be somewhat versatile when it came to the manner of cargo they would be assigned to work with. However, the biggest concern that dogged these machines throughout their working lives was the question of reliability, which was dubious at best and woeful at worst, the shortcomings of the Class 56s being ultimately the invitation for the budding private freight operators to take matters into their own hands and procure a new fleet of more reliable machines, paving the way for the standardization of the Class 66, which is now the face of the modern rail freight scene.